हेलो
बोलिए आप।
हेलो
अभी भीष्म जी बोलिए, हम लोग सुन रहे हैं।
हेलो आदित्य जी।
हाँ जी।
आदित्य जी बिजी हो गए होंगे।
नहीं, आपका इंतजार हो रहा है, आप शुरू
हेलो?
कीजिए। आप फोन से शुरू
आपकी
कीजिए।
आवाज सब लोग सुन रहे हैं, आप बोल सकते हैं।
अच्छा ठीक है। देखिए हमारा कुछ ये गड़बड़ हो गई सिस्टम के बीच में, तो इसलिए मैं तो बात कर सकता हूँ, आपका बात सुन सकता नहीं हूँ, इसलिए थोड़ा सा चक्कर पड़ गया। पर कोई बात नहीं, आप आगे करिए कार्यक्रम को। जब भी टाइम मिलेगा मैं शामिल हो जाऊंगा। अगर किसी तरीके से मैं सुन सकूँ आपकी बात, अच्छा रहेगा। अगर ये बात ठीक है कि मेरी बात सुन रहे हैं आप, तो बस कृपा करके आप चालू करिएगा। अगर किसी ने मना दिया तो हम मिल जाएंगे आपके साथ, ठीक है ना? दैट्स द वे। आप सुन रहे हैं मेरी बात?
हाँ जी।
हाँ, सुन रहे हैं आपकी बात।
फैमिली कर रही, फिर देखता हूँ।
ठीक है आदित्यन जी, शुरू करिए आप।
विवेक जी, डू यू वांट टू
हाँ
स्टार्ट?
ठीक है। सो यस, वेलकम एवरीवन।
ठीक है अग्नत्री जी।
हेलो।
हाँ ठीक है, फिर आप
शुरू
कुछ
कर रहे हैं।
कहेंगे?
ओके विवेक जी,
शुरू करते हैं। हाँ, तो वेलकम एवरीवन टुडे ऑन दिस event of Friends of India Society International. We have Dr. Adityanjee, our own Vice President of FISI, as well as Doctor and the President of CSA. There is multiple things. He is running very decent or deep dive discussions on many topics around the world, around the globe. And we have an honor and privilege to listen to him today on a beautiful topic, which is Vassals, allies, and the nascent multipolarity, India's role as the ultimate balancer. So, without taking much time, Dr. Adityanjee, please start.
thank you Vivek ji. So usually I use PowerPoints, but this time I won't use PowerPoints and I'll stick to my text. So the topic is Vassals, allies, and the nascent multipolarity, India's role as the balancer or the ultimate swing state. So to understand what is happening right now, we have to go back to World War II. Prior to World War II, England or Britain was the reigning superpower, with some regional and major powers represented by the colonial European empires. The fall of the Ottoman Empire led to geopolitical changes in Europe that were coincident with the first major European war that used to be called the Great War and subsequently rechristened as World War I. During this time, the United States was in an isolationist mode. Actually, United States joined the League of Nations and then left it. The United States also refused to join the Second World War for a considerable period of time from 1939 onwards till the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7th, 1941. During both World War I and World War II, an ascendant Germany was the rising hegemon and the Britain was the major superpower. After the end of World War II, there was a managed transfer of geopolitical hegemony from UK to US without falling into the Thucydides trap. Subsequently, the world remained strictly bipolar. From 1945 to 1991, when Soviet Union finally disintegrated owing to its internal weaknesses, the military overreach in the occupation of Afghanistan, and United States containment of Soviet Union using Pakistan and OIC countries. Simultaneously, around the same time, United States used China as a balancer against Soviet Union. There was a time China and Soviet Union were allies, but gradually the relations frayed And in 71, United States started an opening with China to counterbalance Soviet Union. Gradually, United States uplifted Chinese economy by exploiting the cheap labor, and China started to rise. From 1991 onwards, we had a strictly unipolar world with only one hyperpower, the United States, dominating the entire world. With unipolarity, one dominant power actually holds sway over international affairs. It was around 2000 when President Bill Clinton facilitated China's entry into the World Trade Organization without any preconditions that naively created China into an economic behemoth. Actually, in 1990s, United States power was so supreme that United States was involved in multiple wars in the Balkan areas. Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was broken into. There was a famous Madeline's War. And during that Madeline's War, Chinese embassy in Belgrade was bombed, and China could not do anything at that point in time. So that was the era of single hyperpower United States. During the Obama years, a rising hegemon, communist China, started to throw its weight around and demanded what it called a G2 condominium. Basically, China proposed to United States that they subdivide the world geopolitics into two areas, two spheres of influence, the Western Hemisphere as US hemisphere of influence and Eastern Hemisphere as Chinese hemisphere of influence. United States actually rejected it. There was a nascent bipolarity seemingly emerging after the banking and currency crisis of 2008, with China emerging as a peer competitor and rival to the reigning hyperpower. In the currency and banking crisis of 2008, China used its economic muscles and helped most of the ASEAN countries to stabilize their currency situation. Otherwise, they would have gone into default and bankruptcy. Despite Chinese effort, a true bipolarity was never achieved. Chinese strategic postures were shrouded in ambiguity and deception till 2008, when they became more apparent but not really transparent. Till that time, China was following Deng Xiaoping's dictum that you hide your strength and bide for time. Now, in contrast to unipolarity and bipolarity, multipolarity refers to a global system where world power is distributed among major states or blocs instead of being concentrated in the hands of a single dominant power. In multipolar world, several oligopowers compete for influence, resources, and control, often forming complex alliances and rivalries. This distribution of power can lead to a more balanced and stable international system because no single power can unilaterally dictate global affairs or an explosive geopolitical situation. Therefore, concept of multipolarity contrasts with both unipolarity as well as with bipolarity. In the context of international relations, vassal states refer to weaker states or entities that are subordinate to more powerful states. Historically, vassal states were common during the feudal time, where they owed allegiance and provided military support to their more dominant counterparts in exchange for protection and resources. In modern times, the term vassal is less commonly used, but still can be used metaphorically to describe states that are highly dependent on or subservient to more powerful states. So in modern times, an example of a modern vassal state could be the Pakistan or Cambodia in relationship to China. Similarly, one can describe Belarus or Byelorussia as a modern vassal state to the Russian Federation. In medieval China, the emperor was considered the god king or the son of heaven, and Chinese viewed themselves as at the center of the universe as middle kingdom. All the foreigners were barbarians, and the peripheral states that sent ambassadors and tributes to emperor were considered tributary states or vassal states. Now, in contrast to vassal states, allies are states or entities that have formed a formal or informal agreement or treaty to cooperate and support each other in times of needs. These alliances are typically based on shared values, common interests, or mutual defense. Allies often engage in military cooperation, intelligence sharing, economic partnership, and diplomatic coordination to strengthen their collective power and influence. And the examples of such well-known alliances include the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, the European Union. In contrast to allies, partners are friendly states that are not legally bound by any treaties, unlike the allies. So we have to understand a term called Thucydides' trap. Thucydides' trap is a term used in modern times by an American political scientist by name Graham T. Allison, who described an apparent tendency towards war when a rising hegemon threatens to displace an existing power as the major international hegemon. In 12 of 16 cases in which this occurred in last 500 years in the Western world, the end was violent war. It was first described by the Athenian soldier historian Thucydides, who wrote those words 500 BC. It was the rise of the Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. And now, in current complex geopolitical situation, the question is that whether the United States and China fall into Thucydides' trap. Is war between China and US is inevitable, keeping in mind the Thucydides' trap? And if it were to happen, what impact it will have on security and strategic implications for India? So in the title, I had said that, nascent multipolarity. We are not a unipolar world. We are no longer a bipolar world. We are in emerging multipolarity, which is still very nascent. We are not in a multipolar world yet because United States is still the reigning superpower, although it is gradually weakening. There are internal strifes, domestic polarization in US polity. There is economic decline, and there's a shift in global power slowly from the Western hemisphere to Eastern hemisphere. So let's see what are the emerging poles that are coming out. Now, one may say that with Russia's adventure or misadventure in Ukraine, Russia is toast, but actually not so. Russia is still a very important power bloc. It may not be the hyperpower, but it is a regional power. Russia, under Primakov doctrine, had envisaged an alliance of Russia, India, and China to balance United States. And sometimes, once in a while, we do have RIC meetings. Russia is also the leader of CSTO. Russia is in BRICS, SCO, and Russia has also started an economic union called Eurasian Union. At this point in time, Russia still has the largest nuclear arsenals and the most advanced missiles. So despite weakening of Russia, it is still a major bloc, not to be sniffed at. It is not a weak state in that sense. Another likely to emerge pole is surprisingly France. France still has influence in Francophone countries in Africa. France has taken very independent stance in NATO. In fact, in early 2000, France had voted against the Iraq war in United Nations that was started by George W. Bush. France has very, very significant soft power at this point in time. France has its own economic interests, which it guards very jealously. Very recently, French President Macron went to China for guarding French economic interests against European stance against China, as well as US stance against China. France also has a very strong military industrial complex. France is a large exporter of weapons, including Rafales, to India. So France is likely to be a pole or a bloc in an emerging multipolar world. Now let's look at China. China is vying to be the superpower trying to replace United States. It is not there yet. China has major problems. But China has emerged as a very significant pole in a potential multipolar world. It has been aspiring to become superpower since 2008. China is also part of RIC, BRICS, SCO. China leads China-Africa Summit. Its famous one belt, one road, or now renamed as BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, actually passes through more than 100 countries. China is also a member of a number of economic blocs. The most recent economic blocs it's part of is RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Powers, and CPTPP, Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. China is building new institutions like any rising hegemon. China created AIIB, Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, apparently as an alternative to Asian Bank, World Bank, and IMF, but it is confined to Asia only. China also has the headquarters of NDB, New Development Bank, which is a bank started by BRICS. Incidentally, BRICS Bank or NDB was initially proposed by India, specifically by Dr. Manmohan Singh. But in the politics of BRICS, China maneuvered to get the headquarters in Shanghai. Otherwise, the headquarters could have been in India. China is guided by what it calls, and it has enshrined into its constitution, the China dream under Xi Jinping. China has been talking about 21st century as the Asian century, which is a euphemism for 21st century as Chinese century. However, China's economic problems domestically, its 4-to-1 problem, its aging population will not allow China to become the dominant power in 21st century. Also, bilateral problems with India will not allow China to claim Asian century as Chinese century. In last decade or so, China has indulged in militarization of the South China Sea, created artificial islands in South China Sea, and has embarked on what is called wolf warrior diplomacy. Its former diplomats, Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi, both of them have retired now, but they were the proponents of this wolf warrior diplomacy. And current Chinese foreign minister, Qin Gang, is following the same thing. Let's look at another pole. Of course, the dominant pole remains United States. It's the reigning superpower. It will remain so, but is gradually getting weakened. In order to deal with China's challenge, United States is creating new institutions against the rising hegemon, and some of them are Quad, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, I2U2, which is again and then acquired in Middle East, AUKUS that involves Australia, UK, and United States to transfer nuclear submarine technology to Australia so that Australia could be the naval agent of United States and the Western world in Indian Ocean. United States and China will ultimately duke it out in Taiwan if the war were to break out. And in that process, United States does want India to be a military ally in a potential conflict with China over Taiwan. To that effect, United States is offering some crumbs to India, and one of them is NATO +6 membership. I have written in a separate piece that it is not much do about nothing. India does not gain much by getting NATO +6 membership. However, if India were to join, India has already rejected, at least Dr. Jaishankar, there may be some intelligence sharing and there may be some transfer of advanced military platforms at exorbitant costs, which India may not be able to afford. But what is not realized that there will be, if India were to join NATO +6 membership, there will be demand for military bases in India, as well as pressure from United States and whole of the Western world for India to accede to NPT and CTBT, which India considers discriminatory. Now let's consider about India. India has never been a vassal state since 1947. Also, India never had any allies in the true sense, despite having a friendship treaty with the former Soviet Union. Having said that, in last decade or so, India has emerged as a true geopolitical balancer in the ultimate sense, with all the power blocs courting India for closer ties. Importance of India as the chief balancer or the swing state has become very obvious after Russian invasion of Ukraine. And subsequently, India is not voting in United Nations General Assembly and all against Russia, irritated United States. But India's enunciation, or I must say the Prime Minister's enunciation that it is not an era of war, has resonated with the entire world. And actually, after that statement, India has truly emerged on the international geopolitical scene under a new leadership and is being courted by all the states and nations of the world, barring a very few, and those few are, Pakistan and China. There were two tectonic events that brought India to international scene as a major contender, not as superpower, but as a major contender. One was Pokhran 2 nuclear explosions, nuclear tests in 1998 by NDA-1 government, because that made a tectonic shift in India's international standing. And the second event, which has harnessed the same processes, emergence of a new India in 2014 onwards. I think what we do not realize that India is using all tools in the toolbox. India has made very systematic but small attempts to project India's soft power on the international arena since 2014. And you see, June 21st is International Yoga Day from 2014 onwards. This year, 2023, at India's insistence, will be observed as International Year of the Millets. India leads International Solar Alliance. Now, international parlance, handshake is gradually being replaced by namaste. And you saw when Prime Minister visited Papua New Guinea, how he was greeted by the Prime Minister of PNG, touching his feet. You see the same thing happening, in various diplomatic meetings, you are seeing that instead of serving Western food, Indian government is serving Indian delicacies from all the region in India instead of just Western food or so-called Mughlai food. You are getting very subtle messages that India's culture, India's soft power is being projected onto the world. G20 presidency has given India an opportunity to showcase Indian culture and cuisine to the foreign delegates all over India, because G20 meetings are not just in New Delhi, they are all over India. Let's talk about India's hard power. India is generally diffident on talking about hard power, but since 2014 onwards, India's hard power has led to slow killing of the SARC. We don't talk about SARC anymore because SARC was a major irritant in India's near abroad. India created alternative arrangements in the Indian subcontinent. Some of them were pre-existing, but they were strengthened, like BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal Initiative Multi-Sectoral Technological Cooperation, BBIN, which is a sub-regional mechanism for Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. There is something called IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association, which has more than 25 members that are littoral states in Indian Ocean, and this is guided very much by India. India is a member of SCO. India is also a member of BRICS, Quads, I2U2, IPEF. India is a major initiative in India-Africa Summit, and despite initially willing to join RCEP, India finally refused because that gave backdoor entry to Chinese products through RCEP. In economic sphere, India is developing bilateral free trade agreements with various countries instead of multilateral free trade agreements. And India is now in the process of developing some military bases, which was a no-go area for India. India is not focusing on becoming a major superpower, but India is guarding its flank and is trying to become a regional military power so our regional interests are not trampled upon. There is much more assertive diplomacy in India since 2019. And the foreign minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has written a book, The India Way. I think no longer Indian diplomats are diffident, pliant, and agreeing with everyone, whatever is imposed upon India. They have their own viewpoint and they are sticking up to pro-India stance. What are India's challenges as the ultimate balancer? We have twin challenges from external boundaries, and these are military challenges, basically from Pakistan and China, who are no longer two separate states. The military threat is a combined threat from Pakistan and China, who are all weather friends. China has PLA now in Pakistan. China has bases in Pakistan. So you cannot talk about these two countries separately. India has domestic challenges because we have some terror forces that are siding with extraterritorial powers to the detriment of India. Let's see India as a swing state. What are the diplomatic challenges? The diplomatic challenges, surprisingly, come from our former colonial power, United Kingdom. UK, despite lots of geopolitical, depth, still punches above its weight in the international arena. It continues to exercise anti-India hostility and supports anti-India elements in its physical jurisdiction on any issue. Unfortunately, UK has a lot of clout in media, in international relations. So this is a major diplomatic challenge. The other major diplomatic challenge to rising India comes from Canadian government that is in bed with Khalistani terrorists for many decades now. We did talk about that, Air India Kanishka plane crash. That was, I think, in 1984. There's no change in behavior of Canadian government due to electoral vote bank politics and very strong domestic Khalistani lobby. So India has to plan proactively for diplomatic challenge from Canada. The third country India faces diplomatic challenge is, although far away from India, it's Turkey or former Turkey. This country under leadership of Erdogan imagines itself as the successor of the Ottoman Empire and wants to take the leadership of the Islamic world from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In this process, they deem themselves as new caliphate and have posed, not generally spoken about, security and strategic threats to India. Voting record of Turkey in the United Nations and other international fora needs to be studied very closely to perceive these hostile trends. Turkey is also supporting some domestic terror groups that I will not talk about in this forum. The other diplomatic challenge comes from OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries. Although they are very disparate and motley crowd, but even countries like Bangladesh, Iran, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Libya, Malaysia, and Maldives have contributed to anti-India activities and rhetoric on the platform of OIC. And lastly, there is a challenge to India as an emerging bloc or as the swing state from the deep state. And I would not elaborate on what the deep state is. Deep state has been allegedly involved in the murder/assassination of Dr. Homi J. Bhabha and former Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri. Although it is not officially acknowledged, but at least there are some open reports about assassination of Dr. Bhabha. What are the internal challenges to India? Internal challenges are corruption in the system, dynastic politics, which breeds corruption. The civil polity is very fractured in India. There is abuse of powers by institutions, and most egregious example is the Supreme Court. India is still facing terrorism fomented from abroad. There are extraterritorial loyalties of Islamic, Christian, and Khalistani factions that always indulge in anti-India propaganda. Having said that, a doctrine of Indian exceptionalism is taking place in recent years. In a 2005 papers that was published in a website called SAG, South Asia Analysis Group, I talked about India's exceptionalism. At this juncture, Indian exceptionalism is in full bloom, and there are major power centers that need to understand what is India's exceptionalism. So if the major powers understand India's exceptionalism, they would be willing to work with India. Fortunately, United States has acknowledged indirectly India's exceptionalism. Kurt Campbell, White House coordinator on Indo-Pacific issues, last month gave a statement that India is going to be a major power, but India is not going to be a US ally. The geographies of India and United States are different. India will continue to maintain, under the new leadership, an independent foreign policy. India will continue to exercise its strategic independence. India may have partnership with various nations. The usual dictum that international relations are not a zero-sum game. I think now Indian diplomats have to teach both United States and Russian Federation that our partnership with you is not at the expense of the other country or a third country. So India could continue to buy oil and S-400 from Russian Federation. On the other hand, India is buying a number of drones, other armament from United States. There is a agreement, ISET, Initiative for Critical Technology, sharing of critical technology. So we are in an era that no one should take India for granted. India is under a new leadership, has a new vision, and that vision is not to kowtow to anyone. It has to project India's soft power, India's hard power, India's smart power in India's own right. And I would say that events that are going to unfold in Washington, DC on June 22nd will show to you that Prime Minister of India is being invited for the second time to address the United States Congress, despite having differences with United States on, buying oil from Russia or not condemning Russia enough to Western satisfaction. United States is still engaging with India. And I think that tells a lot about this new India, India's strategic posture, India's foreign policy, and India's projection of its own soft power as well as economic clout. So with those comments, I will end my presentation and we can have some discussion.
Thank you, Adityanjee. I see Bhishmaji has joined. So, Bhishmaji, can you please unmute?
Bhishmaji, kindly unmute yourself. You are muted. Vivekji, can you unmute him as a host?
Here. Unmute.
Yeah.
Yes.
I got all right.
Yes.
But I heard you all. Adityanjee, I heard your presentation substantially. Okay, we got it done because we had a different kind of numbers which you're working with anyway. No, I have nothing to add at this time. Let us talk about the whole thing anyway, because it was very, very deep presentation and very timely. And I think we would like to hear from you, all of you.
Adityanjee, thank you for such a nice presentation. I see one thing you have mostly emphasized unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar in the context of military power. The other two powers like economic or currency power that led to downfall of British and power going to US means pound sliding away and dollar coming up during that power is equally important. And the third one that I see is very important is technology, information, or digital power. So they need to be addressed too. I mean, in the same context, when we talk about military power, or emphasize mostly the military power.
I think you are right. When we talk about major powers, we just don't talk about military power. And I did mention India's soft power, hard power, and smart power, those three things. There's a metric called comprehensive national strength and comprehensive national power. It is a metric that is calculated on the basis of a number of parameters. So according to the current calculations, United States is still number one, China is number two. But the way Chinese calculate, they are almost approaching the number one status. India is not there. So metrics, complex metrics like comprehensive national strength or comprehensive national power are the current zeitgeist on which, power equation is understood. So usually what tends to happen that a reigning superpower overextends itself and then collapses economically, and that leads to the downfall, both in the military sense and other sense. And you could see how Soviet Union disintegrated. What happened that there was no economic power. It drained its resources in a decade-long war in Afghanistan. And similar thing seems to be happening when we say that United States is weakening. United States is still topmost military power, topmost technological power. But if you see the contribution or the sharing of the GDP internationally, United States contribution is decreasing over a period of time. China's, proportion of GDP is increasing. India's proportion is increasing. So GDP, economic clout is being transferred from west to east. So, these are complex metrics that are taken into consideration. It's never black or white. Military power is dependent on other powers. If you cannot manufacture arms domestically, you cannot be a major military power. If you cannot actually sustain your economy, you cannot become a military power. So they go hand in hand, but the new equation is comprehensive national power that decides where you stand in the rankings.
And one more thing, I need your input. Why Turkey, besides being the Khilafat kind of thing, is against India, is so much against India? I think at this time, if I can say, it's number one country which is doing all it can do to destabilize India.
Well, this is why I mentioned, in polite circles and diplomatic circles, people don't talk about Turkey. There was a time in 70s, India didn't want to organize OIC countries. Oh, they will not sell oil to us. That was a myth. India cannot have relationship with Israel because that will antagonize Arab countries. Turkey or Turkey is positioning itself as the leader of the Islamic world.
They call themselves Turkey.
Yeah, they call themselves now, the new name is Turkey.
Right.
Turkey. So Turkey actually started an initiative along with Malaysia and a couple of other Islamic countries to have a separate Islamic conference and things like that. So there is an internal power struggle. Islamic world is into three groups now, one led by Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, other the Shiite countries by Iran, and Turkey actually throwing a spanner and wanting to lead the Islamic world. And if it has to lead the Islamic world, it has to bring India down. I don't need to spell to you or state to you why it is so. But unfortunately, Indian establishment does not recognize it as yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Surajji. Vajpayee, are you saying something?
I think he is muted. He may have to unmute himself.
Hello.
Hanji.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I have a small question. You mentioned about India joining NATO, the prospects of that kind of eventuality happening. How do you see, will India ever join NATO or any other group of this type?
Answer is with a capital N, N-O. That's not going to happen. And the offer was not for NATO. Offer was for NATO plus 6 mechanism. India cannot be party to NATO because there's an Article 5. India is not part of the treaty. NATO plus 5 mechanism was started in year 2000, in which there are 5 countries. There's Australia, New Zealand, Israel, South Korea, and Japan. They are not former treaty allies, but they do some intelligence sharing and some other military cooperation with NATO. And they are not part of NATO per se. What has been offered to India is not NATO membership, but NATO plus 6 membership. There's not even a formal offer. It's just a recommendation of a congressional committee on China that has recommended to United States government that India be part of NATO plus 6 arrangement. Before it could be formalized, the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has already excluded this. I don't think it is in India's interest to be part of NATO or its mechanisms, but India will not join NATO, and it is very unlikely India will join NATO plus 6 offer if it is at all made. And I gave the reasons why it should not join those.
My second question is about Russia-Ukraine war. How do you see the future of this war?
Can you say the last sentence again?
Russia and Ukraine war, how do you see its future?
So let me say that it is it's a white tribal European conflict. Europeans have been fighting all their history. You know, they fought in Balkans, major powers, UK, England, France and Germany, they have been fighting with each other. So Europe has propensity to fight amongst themselves, and they have a propensity to make European wars into world wars. Both World War I and World War II were essentially European wars. And this Russia-Ukraine war has the potential of becoming a low-level, festering European war. Rest of the world, except for United States, does not have appetite for it. And you might have seen that a group of African countries visited President Putin, asking him to end the war because it's having some implications on African countries. In the United Nations, most of the Asian countries have refrained from taking sides because it does not, it's not at our doorstep. There's no reason for Asian countries to partner with one or the other. Even a country like China has not openly supported any party and has called for mediation. Of course, by mediation, China means that its own hegemonic proposals could be considered so that in future it benefits if there is a future war on Taiwan. But the bottom line is that it will remain a slow festering European war. They'll keep on, fighting with each other. I don't see it resolving because the international community will not let it resolve. It would have resolved by now if United States had not sent billions of dollars and, UK and France and Germany had not supported Ukraine. So the war is being kept alive to weaken the Russian Federation, and it will continue because Russian Federation is not going to, leave the parts of Ukraine it has already occupied. And so we are at a stalemate. It's a quagmire. Europe has gone into another quagmire.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Adityanjee. I'm not sure. Is there any other comment or question?
Well, if there's any other question or comment, I'll be happy to answer.
If I may ask one more question about the Indo-Pacific region development. futuristic. How do you view that?
See, Indo-Pacific initiative is basically, from US perspective, to contain China. India is part of certain Indo-Pacific institutions, but India is not going to say openly that we are in the business of containing China. And that is where the differences in perception come between India and US. Yes, India would not like China to become, dominant power in Indian Ocean or South China Sea for that matter, and keep the sea lanes of communication open. But focus on Indo-Pacific in contrast to Asia-Pacific tells you that India has a right. This is a subtle recognition of India's role in Indian Ocean as well as in the former Asia-Pacific region. So India has its interest from Straits of Hormuz to the Straits of Malacca. And in many ways, India is becoming a net security provider in that particular area. India is not aiming to be willing to get involved in war over Taiwan. That would be suicidal. It does not make sense. I mean, you don't believe that government of Taiwan has not renounced its claim on Tibet or parts of India. How would India be expected to support Taiwan along with the United States against communist China if the Taiwanese government does not renounce its claim on Tibet and northeastern parts of India? So it's a very complex issue. And yes, India is all for economic cooperation. In fact, I wrote a paper on creation of an entity called IPCO, Indo-Pacific Cooperation Organization. And that paper was written a year ahead of White House, proposing Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. You look at Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is selective. The IPCO I proposed was a much broader organization, including Indo-Pacific countries, including the island countries in the Pacific, because they are under heavy dominance of China. And again, we are realizing it now. India has not done much outreach to Pacific Island nations. So, Indo-Pacific remains open, but it is not in India's interest to get into conflict with any dominant power militarily or try to contain a power militarily. India has to safeguard her own economic and technological interests.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vaishpeji. Thank you, Adityanjee.
Adityanjee, let me say that looks like you have left your job. Huh? You are all scholarly person, different person altogether. I enjoyed everything you said. Of course, I was not there in the beginning, but your control on everything, your understanding of everything is wonderful. It's not like a doctor. Okay, one thing I can tell you, but it's good. It's very good. That's why I'm saying that you should change your profession, perhaps. But anyway, it's great. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure you covered a lot of other things too. Many things are going to happen in a few days, and you must have noticed what they are going to do. And ultimately, I think it will affect many things. If the things go the way they appear to be going, okay? I'm not going to the program, though I had reason to go there, but I thought enough is enough. But I think it will be great. That's my feeling. And what you said had great meaning. That's wonderful. Okay. But you were very, I would say, as we discussed, very restrained in your comments. That's good too. You're a politician too, it looks like. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. I didn't want to miss it. I had problems, this thing or that thing. Ultimately, I got it. Okay. So,
Yeah. Thank you, Bijji. And just want to add on to what Bijji is talking about you, Adityanjee. So by profession, you are a psychiatrist, but it seems like you have expanded your horizon from being human psychologist or psychiatrist to the world understanding of.
very good. Very good.
I think he's in a better position to understand what happens at the community level or state level.
Yeah, that's nice. Very nice.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Let's have another meeting after something happens in New York, okay? And then we think about something else. Okay, at that time, just details of what happened, how it happened, but we can talk about that.
Sure.
I think it will be great. It will be continuation of what we have done today, but we can put it in different form. And I don't know why we don't have too many people, but we'll just have to talk a little bit more to people who we want here.
I think it is the start of summer and most people are gone because the
Okay.
fine exams are over for the children.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Let's stick together.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Adityanjee.
you. Good night.
Okay, namaskar.